Life is full of things to manage. Your work, your family, your plans, and your treatment. Consider Kesimpta, ofatumumab 20 milligram injection. You can take it yourself from the comfort of home. If you're ready for something different, ask your healthcare provider about Kesimpta and check out the details at kesimpta.com. Brought to you by Novartis Pharmaceuticals Corporation.
Earning your degree online doesn't mean you have to go about it alone. At Capella University, we're here to support you when you're ready. From enrollment counselors who get to know you and your goals, to academic coaches who can help you form a plan to stay on track. We care about your success and are dedicated to helping you pursue your goals. Going back to school is a big step, but having support at every step of your academic journey can make a big difference. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Underrated Movie Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss films that are underrated, underappreciated, and ones that have gone under the radar and passed most people by. Today, we're going to be talking about the 2018 steampunk post-apocalyptic fantasy sci-fi film directed by Christian Rivers, written by Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, and Peter Jackson, based on the novel by Philip Reeve. I am your host, Derek McDuff, and joining me to talk about this movie is Mike G. from the Masters of the Nerdiverse podcast. How's it going, Mike?
It's going great. I am extremely excited to talk about this very interesting film, and want to just first of all thank you for having me on the show. I'm more than excited. This is amazing.
Yeah, I'm glad to be on. I recently got a chance to be on your show as well. We got to talk about some Marvel stuff. Before we get too much into the social Darwinism and the all the stuff that and the Shrike and all the stuff that's entailed in this movie, what did you want to let the people know about yourself and your show?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Mike G. I am from the Masters of the Nerdiverse podcast, where we always have such sights to show you. I always like to describe our podcast as a Toys R Us made flesh. Pretty much, if there's anything inside of, let's say, a Toys R Us, that's on the channel. We cover pop culture, anything from MCU to video games to just all over the place. We just want to make sure we give a nice kaleidoscope of the culture. So you will definitely be very interested in our channel. We have over 100 episodes. We just talk about a little bit of everything. It's really fun. We have a ton of fun on our channel.
Yeah, you guys are almost like the historians in this movie, collecting all the different pieces of the of pop culture and whatnot, and collecting them and cataloging them. So it's good stuff for sure. Speaking of those collectors and the social Darwinism and all the insane stuff that was going on in this movie, we were kind of talking back and forth about what movie we wanted to cover, and you sent me, I sent you a list, and you sent me a list of kind of narrowed down ones for that, and one of them was Mortal Engines, and it's been one that had been on my radar for a while, and so when you mentioned, I was like, all right, let's do this one. What about this movie was something that you wanted to talk about?
Absolutely. One is I've seen it before, but very long ago, almost when it first premiered. I saw Mortal Engines. I didn't see it in the theater. I saw it when it first kind of became available for DVD, I believe, in Blu-ray. And
nobody saw it in the theater, by the way, which we'll get to. But
womp womp. Yeah, no one went to go. They didn't come out in droves for this. They were too busy being chased by a mobile version of like La Placenta or something. They were being chased by Tucson, Arizona.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like this movie because it really left me wanting to know more about the lore and about just like the overarching themes of the film. And it had Peter Jackson's name attached to it. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson fan, brain dead, just all of his stuff. I've always wanted, if his name was attached, I'll give it a shot. And so kind of being pleasantly surprised and kind of wondering why this didn't do so well. It must have went against some kind of juggernaut in the box office at the time, because I really enjoyed this film.
Yeah, this movie, I think it went up against Into the Spider-Verse, so that was a juggernaut that definitely helped take it down. But I think even considering that, I don't know how well this movie would have done because this is one of the all-time just box office bombs. It lost, I think, it reported like $175 million.
Mm.
Critics, kind of tore this movie apart. But like you said, this is a movie that I think is a lot of fun. I really like the world building, the lore, all that stuff. You mentioned Peter Jackson. Of course, he wrote it alongside his writing team, Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens, who they also co-wrote all of the Lord of the Rings films together. And then I mentioned Christian Rivers. This is his directorial debut so far, as of recording, the only film that he's directed. He is also a longtime collaborator with Peter Jackson and his whole crew. They'd known each other since Jackson and Rivers had known each other since they were teenagers. He is mostly works on visual effects. He won a Academy Award for his visual effects on King Kong. But this is the first time he actually got behind the camera and made a movie. And people weren't happy with the results. But this movie, for me, I understand the criticism and the perceived flaws, but I kind of couldn't help but a lot of the things that were detractions for people are things that I quite enjoy. And I say this movie falls into, for me, a specific category that I kind of invented, and I did a miniseries years back now. I call them big swings. They're these movies that I have 5 criteria for them. 1, they're hugely imaginative, which this clearly is. 2, massive special effects budget, which, man, this movie has a lot of special effects. Weta did them. They look incredible. 3, we already touched on the world building that is in this movie. 4, it's got to be kind of bonkers. It's got to be a little bit weird, a little bit wacky, a little bit gonzo. And then the other thing I think is that it's not part of an existing film franchise. So, this is obviously loosely adapted from the novels, but there are no other Mortal Engines movies. This is the only one. So, this squarely falls into that. Other movies that I'd say are like this are a lot of the post-Matrix stuff from the Wachowskis, Cloud Atlas, Speed Racer, Jupiter Ascending, Alita Battle Angel, these weird big movies that are really taking a swing and trying something different, because there's so much in this movie that it's weirdly both kind of formulaic, but also unlike anything you've seen before.
Right.
So
Right.
I really appreciated that. I don't know. What did you think of the film and the story and the characters and the world that it's all in?
Absolutely. So when I mentioned earlier that I first saw this film back closer to when it was in active release,
Mm-hmm.
and then active home release, and I kind of walked away with the same feeling that I had when I first saw it. It's like, would you like to know more?
Yeah.
Some Starship Troopers, and it's just this movie is good because it world builds, and is world building at a very quick pace.
Mm-hmm.
So before you can even wrap your brain around the 60-minute war, you're on to the municipal Darwinisms. You're on to just the overall ecosystem that this story builds, and you're constantly jumping from one foot to the next along the roller coaster ride that is this film. And it just, at the end of all things, I just there's so much I want to learn more about, to the point where I even bought the books and was actually trying to dive a bit deeper, because I just, knowing that this was a bomb, and it's like we're never getting another one of these anytime soon. It's like I can't be left unsated. You know what I mean? I need to kind of understand a bit more. And what's sad is that I never even got to read them. I lent them to a desperate friend, and he just ran off into the ether. So I'm still left.
Man.
No, I'm still left wanting more. But I love the world building. I love, like you mentioned, the steampunk aesthetic, kind of like steampunk slash sci-fi, almost. Like there's certain things in the world that are very high tech, like certain ships and certain just overall means of energy, and then there's certain things that are very low tech, almost like Frankenstein's monster, like almost Bloodborne, Lovecraftian levels of tech. And to see those two play with each other in playing this world just makes it so fascinating.
Yeah, because I think this movie, it throws a ton at the wall, and you mentioned there's a lot of world building and lore and stuff that the movie has to kind of get out of the way. This movie is, I would say, very exposition heavy, and I would think that is one of maybe the weaknesses that critics pointed out. Once again, it didn't necessarily bother me so much because I felt like they did a good job of kind of just quickly getting through it, to the point where even the opening logos of the movie do some world building establishing. Like usually, you
Yeah.
have like the logos and they kind of come up and you're like waiting for the movie to start. But the logos come up. The Universal logo has like the 60-minute war going on. You're seeing all the like, the bombs going off and stuff like those that iconic now or not iconic necessarily, but like what would become in throughout the film, very symbolic thing of like, okay, here's the weapon. It's very purple and you see those little bombs going off all around the Universal logo while the voiceover is already starting to tell you about the 60-minute war. So it's like, boom, you're right in. You're not wasting any time. This movie's 2 hours. We're getting you. We're not going to like take a lot of time to explain it. We're just going to tell you what you need to know. And then it's like, cool, boom, you need to, here's a Predator City. That opening sequence
It's
where it's like
amazing.
incredible, right?
Yeah.
And it tells you what you need to know, right? Here's the premise of the movie. It's the future. Cities are now on big tracks. Here's London, and it's hunting down these smaller little townships or whatever. There's like a little Bavarian town that they're going down. And that sequence where it's just chasing it across, the land of Europe, and you see it going and it's chasing them down. You're so invested. And then it gets them, it shuts them up into their big thing, the doors close, it eats the other city, and then it just said, boom, Mortal Engines, title screen. And it's like, cool, visual. Like, I was texting my friend about this movie. I was like, yeah, I'm about to watch London Eat Some Cities. And she was like, what does that even mean? And I was like, you know what? It's too much to explain. Let me I just shared her with the clip because it's like, how can you even really describe this movie? It's such a visual masterpiece, really, despite all of the exposition and stuff like that. Where it really shines is in that visual storytelling. So there's this Predator Cities. There's also Shrike. You mentioned he's like a very Frankenstein monster-esque creature. Stephen Lang, by the way, incredible in
Incredible
that
job.
performance. He's so good, like all around, like very, very good performances. You have Hugo Weaving also as a really great bad guy. Then you also have Robert Sheehan, people might know from Umbrella Academy. You have in the lead role Hera Hilmar, who is she's a really interesting, unique, I feel like, hero. You don't see people with big facial scars like that. Like they do, I guess maybe it's
love
worse
that.
in the book, but like they don't shy away from it. Like she's got a gnarly scar. It's not like a little like Anakin Skywalker, cool thing. It's like,
No,
no, this
she
is
has
like
like a
gnarly. Yeah, it's like all across the face. So I loved absolutely all of that.
yeah, I really dug, and that's another thing that really just I was like, well, I want to know more about the Lazarus Brigade. Like, who were these guys, man? These almost not even the colors are so vibrant in this
Mhm.
movie. Like everything is there's no saturation. If you look at Shrike, he's very fire green for the most time, like almost in
Mhm.
your face day glow, and
The
it's this
eyes
beautiful.
just glowing.
Yeah, his eyes are just going, and he has this huge presence, and he's like this on the periphery of the film the entire time, as since is showing up. But you mentioned, I think his name is Tom, who was the kid from
Mhm.
the Umbrella Academy, and I was just like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, that's a pleasant surprise when someone I didn't recognize when I first saw, but now he's done major things. It's like, oh,
Mhm.
okay, that this would have been a good vehicle, no pun intended, for for him. And like you said, with a very unorthodox main character in Hester Shaw, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? The the f- the flawed revenger, you know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Mhm.
And how you kind of see her in almost like a Sundari type role, where she's very standoffish, very on the ball when it comes to her revenge point, kind of soften throughout the film. You kind of get to know more about her story and how she's the chosen one in a weird way, but
Yeah.
not. But one thing I like about this film is that there's no really definitive main character, because I think Tom and her share it a little
Mhm.
bit. Because Tom's journey is almost just as interesting as hers, like his growth to his true destiny, and them playing with those two different tropes while having the overset of this beautiful dark
Yeah.
landscape is what gives this movie its juice.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about the dark landscape and just how, like, we talked about how impressive this movie looks, and it's doing so much. Like they're throwing out all these terms like anti-traction league and the blah blah blah, like all this stuff you gotta kind of keep track of, but it also does so much just telling you visually. We
Mhm.
talked about the opening scene and how that establishes stuff, but that's clear throughout the movie. There, when they go to that prison, it's like hanging over the sea or whatever, and you've got the Shrike is in the box or whatever, and then he gets out. or even like little moments. Like there's when you see they're up in that, Cloud City type area from the
Yes.
Anti-Traction League, and then you see a ship come in and it's got these big glowing green high beams. And that just tells you, okay, well, that's the Shrike ship. Like, nothing says, like, okay, here's the Shrike coming, but you know that's him because he's been established as having these, like, high beam green eyes. So when a ship comes in with those same things, it doesn't necessarily, like, there's no reason his ship would have the same color as his eyes, but you get it from a filmmaking perspective. And that's why I think that having this guy who is primarily a visual effects artist be the one who directed the movie is what really helps it stand apart, really gives it that flair, that visual storytelling, that, and then of course, a script done by the same people who wrote Lord of the Rings. I think that all really works well to kind of give you a lot. And you're, like you said, you want to know more about the world, right? Because it tells you these things. You just get glimpses of the city, or like it tells you about the stationary cities that are behind the shield wall, but you don't get to see them. And clearly they were like getting ready to do 3 more movies because there's
Mhm.
4 books in the series. And that would have been really cool to see. I would have loved to expand out this world. But in the 2 hours that we had, I thought it did a good job of giving you enough information about London, about this world, without feeling too overbearing. With being like, okay, we're going to save something for the next ones if they happen. But also, it doesn't leave you on, like, how I mentioned similar movies, this like Alita Battle Angel. That's a movie that just straight up ends on like a huge cliffhanger. You're like, what's going to happen next? And then and we're probably never going to get another Alita movie. So that movie just it's kind of a bummer when that ends. Whereas this, you would like to see more, but it does tell a coherent whole story at the end of the day.
Absolutely. It does definitely give you a beginning, middle, end. Let's go on to our next adventure type
Mm.
conclusion. And one thing I want to tie back to what you were mentioning is in regards to the visual storytelling. And I love to see when you get a particular type of vision and the director's role. It's very rare,
Mm.
but you'll get like a music video director to make a film, and it's a completely different aesthetic than your standard director. I'm almost thinking of like Mary Lambert for Pet Cemetery. There's just something
Mm.
different about the eye that they're seeing it from a different direction. Or you have someone who was a stunt coordinator direct something like The Raid, where it's just a different kind of kinetic energy that they're bringing based upon their expertise. And with this film, it was very Guillermo del Toro-ish, where
Mm.
it doesn't need to slap you in the face with exposition. The world's the exposition. You know what I mean?
Right.
The subtle ways that certain machines work, and how what particular colors are trying to convey what particular emotions. One of my favorite scenes in the film is where the Hugo Weaving character is explaining his love for toasters with Tom,
Yes.
and you're talking about how sick this toaster is, and it's like how much they value old world technology, because it almost has that Horizon Zero Dawn type of effect where it's like the old stuff is the new stuff.
Mm. Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's so much to learn from the old ways, and kind of like scrummaging for being being, and they showed like even a cell phone, like a button, a cell phone
Mhm.
that was turned off. So I love like little bits of storytelling without telling the story.
Right, and one of my favorite ways they do that is they have a Twinkie, which it's funny because there's the
Hmm.
whole urban myth of like Twinkies last forever or whatever, and she's like eating it, and Tom looks at the expiration date and he's like 2100 or whatever he says. That was 1,000 years ago, so it tells you, okay, cool, we're 1,000 years in the future now. The world ended 1,000 years ago, and it just does it by using a Twinkie. So there's a lot of really clever beats and moments like that where they tell you about the world without having to do, and they do a little bit of the cheating, the exposition dumps and stuff like that, but it's very brief. It's not overwhelming. They do most of it with organic storytelling through character dialogue, through props, through the world itself. And I really like that. I also like that you mentioned Guillermo del Toro, because it reminded me of something that I talked about Crimson Peak a couple episodes back with my guest Phil Iskov on that episode, and we were talking about how that was a movie that was moderately expensive. This is a movie that is much, much more expensive, and we're talking about how a lot of these movies end up costing just an arm and a leg, and because of it they have to make so much money back at the box office to be profitable. And we're kind of talking about, like, maybe these movies don't need to cost so much and stuff like that. But on the other hand, something I didn't bring up in that episode is that I am kind of glad that these movies exist, even if they don't.
Yeah.
If they don't work at the box office, the critics don't like them, whatever. I'm still so glad that we have your Jupiter Ascendings, your Alita Battle Angels, your Speed Racers, and your Mortal Engines, because while they might not have been great for the studios or whatever, the fact that they spent all this money and made, like, if this movie had cost half a quarter of what it did and it had been a more profitable movie, sure, that would have been cool, but we wouldn't have gotten what we got. And I'm so glad that this movie exists. I'm so glad that these big swings exist, because almost every time when one of these comes out, because of all these hurdles they have to jump over, because it's so expensive, because it's not tied into another film franchise, they tend to kind of crash and burn at the box office like this one did. But I don't think that necessarily takes away from the movie that this is. Like, I really am glad that we have these things, and as long as studios keep making them, I don't know how much longer they will, because everything's so IP driven, but I'm glad that they exist.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned in regards to just like their impact on the culture, impact on just filmmaking, without being the multi-billion-dollar juggernaut franchise that they hope to be. Because every couple of years there comes a generational film. There's your Screams,
Mhm.
there's your Twilights, and then everybody's on the board. But then you have that one insane film director, that one insane screenwriter who said, "I'm going to write the next one,
Mhm.
and I'm going to get the backing, I'm going to get the foundation, I'm going to get the actors, I'm going to get the marketing," and it just doesn't work out for whatever measure of whatever means. But that doesn't take away from the imagination that these films spur in other filmmakers. These movies are inspirations for other filmmakers, large and small. So they absolutely have their place in history. Like John Carter. I love John Carter. It's one of my
Yeah.
favorite movies. Biggest bombs of all time.
Yeah.
But, they're doing the Nerdiverse's work,
Right.
making these films because they're so important, just to stretch that imagination to do something that's outside the norm and trying to set the norm rather than go with the norm. And I think a lot of companies rely on the certain ability of a active franchise versus saying, we're going to grab this book from 2000 that like maybe 10 people know, and
Mhm.
we're going to make it a household name. We feel like it has the legs. We feel like it has the marketability to be big. And just sometimes they go against the monster. Like, sometimes there's just something lost in the translation. Like, a lot of people say this film feels stuffed, but it doesn't. It gives you a lot to chew on in its 2 hours, right? It gives
Mhm.
you a lot to chew on. But that being said, by the end of it, you're just in the world. It almost reminds me of, like, this could have been Avatar in the right year. You
Mhm.
know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because it's so much world building. It's so alien. It's so normal but alien.
Mhm.
That you just kind of want to absorb more. And I take my hat off to these films because and I hope they don't stop. And I think they won't, because there's always going to be that one person who wants to make the new McDonald's, who wants to make the new Burger King, but also tell a compelling, interesting story with something and show the audience something they've never seen before.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, because you brought up Avatar, and I think that that's another movie that almost could be a big swing. It's like, I don't think it's quite weird enough. Although the sequel might be. The sequel gets weird and really fascinating, and interesting. But yeah, I think that's what the studio, like you mentioned with John Carter. I think Mortal Engines. They kind of thought, like, we might have like another Avatar on our hand, and Avatar was one when it first was coming out, both the first and the second, where people were like, "Oh, is this going to be a huge money loser?" Like, it's very expensive, and it's not, people don't know this thing, but that one movie comes out and connects with people. And for whatever reason, this one doesn't have that same effect, despite the talent behind it. They pretty much promoted, like, from Peter Jackson, from the creators of the Lord of the Rings. It doesn't hit with people. And it's partially obviously because it goes up against one of the biggest animated movies of all time, but it also is just whatever the culture at the moment. And I think that a lot of these type of movies, like this and John Carter and a lot of the other ones we've mentioned, they have this interesting second life, right? Where they fail at the box office, but then later on, streaming, DVDs, it used to be like on cable, but that's not really necessarily a thing anymore. They would get this second life, and they would become these kind of beloved cult movies. I'm thinking of one I just saw for the first time recently an 80s movie which bombed hard, and it is weird and just interesting and doing all the stuff. The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai. That is a movie that is just like
amazing, amazing
right?
film. Yeah,
It's so weird, and I get why, because it's a lot of the same things. A lot of just like really cool special effects, a lot of interesting world building, these cool characters, great performances from a lot of great actors, and it's kind of like what you at the time it comes out. It's like, how do you market this thing? It's really weird what's going on, but it's become absolutely beloved over the years. And I don't necessarily know that that's happening yet to Mortal Engines, but it definitely has happened to a lot of the films of its ilk. This movie's only from 2018, so it definitely has its time to do it. But I think they're starting to see inklings of people loving certain things about it. Going on Letterboxd, like there's so many reviews that are just like, my boy, the Shrike. The Shrike is amazing. I love the Shrike because he's a truly fascinating, bizarre character. He's Frankenstein-esque, like we talked about. But his design is weird. He's also like this insane, murderous, single-minded robot, but there's like a deep humanity to him. He's a kind of foster father almost to Hester, and he is like wants to kill her, but also he wants to do it so he can make her like him because he's so alone and he thinks she won't be hurting anymore. And it speaks to kind of like that notion of, when something traumatic happens to you, do you cut yourself off from your emotions or do you allow yourself to feel it? So such a fascinating, interesting character, and he never overstays his welcome. He's utilized just enough, and he gives her the kind of MacGuffin he ties all back into the story, so he's not superfluous at all. So really a fan of that. Do you see this movie becoming a cult hit at all?
This episode is brought to you by PNC Bank, who believes some things in life should be boring, like banking, because boring is steady, pragmatic, responsible. You don't want your bank to be cool or sexy. Sexy is for red carpets, not banks. That's why PNC Bank strives to be boring with your money, so you can be happily fulfilled with your life. PNC Bank, brilliantly boring since 1865. Brilliantly boring since 1865 is a service mark of the PNC Financial Services Group, Inc. PNC Bank, National Association, member FDIC.
The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is,
"Thank you for calling. Please listen to your list of 46 possible service options."
Which is why when you choose USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable. 24/7 online service for claims, access to roadside assistance, and more. All at the touch of a button. Start getting the service you deserve. Get a quote today. Ability to receive a quote depends on membership eligibility. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliate, San Antonio, Texas.
I can definitely see the cult appeal. I can see it becoming a cult classic only because of it's such a niche film.
Yeah.
Buckaroo Banzai is a very niche film. You say that to 10 people on the street right now, they're not going to know what you're talking about. You know what I mean?
Right.
But to those who love it, they ultra love it. And I think, that you can never really truly make a cult classic. It makes itself in a weird way. And I tend to call it the Back to the Future syndrome. Where it's like, this new sound that you're looking for, and nobody, and everyone's just jaw dropped, don't know how to take it. It's like, yeah, your kids are going to love this. Marty McFly tells the people.
Right. That's it's
kind of like,
good.
It's kind of like this, where it's like, it's so off the beaten path that people just don't know how to accept it. It's like seeing a space alien in real life. Because I don't know how to engage with this crazy foundation, but this crazy notion. But then let's say 10 years down the line, and it's been about that, right? It's been about a good 10.
It's been about, so it came out 2018, so it's been about, 6 years, I guess.
7 years. It still has some time still has some time in the kitchen. I could definitely see people cosplaying as Shrike. I could see people cosplaying as Hester. You know what I mean? I can, nowadays someone will cosplay as London, the mechanical, the actual floating city. But I love your ideas of Shrike and how he's like this interesting character who has foibles and has emotional beats and never outstays his welcome. He is not the antagonist. He's more of like a growth point for Hester. You know what I mean? For her to overcome her past to embrace the future. And once again, Stephen did an amazing job. And part of me almost thought he was practical. Was anything about his design practical effect? I don't think, right? He was
I don't.
all CG, right?
I think it was motion capture, right? Like, because this is obviously done by Weta, so the same people who had done the motion capture in Avatar, which obviously
Mhm.
Stephen Lang was in, but also like Lord of the Rings, Planet of the Apes. So I think it's similar to like an Andy Serkis performance, in one of those movies where and I think that's why the performance is so good. It comes through because, especially by 2018, the motion capture is really like they are like everything you're seeing is CG, but they are still the CG is capturing the performance that they're doing, right? They're animating all the emotions and the little ticks that they're doing, like the way that he'll like even something as subtle as like moving his eye, like they'll
Mhm.
get that, they'll put that into the film, and I think there is a very strong bias against motion capture performances. Andy Serkis not getting nominated ever for his performance in either Lord of the Rings or especially Planet of the Apes, which is one of my all-time favorite. Like him as Caesar is one of the
Yes.
great performances in cinematic history. Just did not get the respect that he deserved, and I think that Lang in this movie falls into that same category.
Absolutely. And it's the unsung heroes of the acting community, especially like in the video game era, where
Mhm.
there's so many amazing motion capture performances, like in God of War, like in Red Dead Redemption 2, games like that, where the motion capture, these are classically trained actors in these roles where you don't necessarily see their face, but you feel their emotion. You hear the tenor of their voice, and it communicates with you, such as with Shrike in his last moments being happy that Esther is
Mhm.
happy. You know what I mean? You feel that, and then he's gone. But I think that this film has definitely a place for maybe even a resurgence, because a lot of these cult classics are mined by streaming services like Hulu,
Mhm.
like Netflix, and this could easily be like a 6, 7 episode series. Like almost like a reboot. Almost, it can easily fall into that fad and be successful. Kind of makes me think of like Dread and how I pray for like a Dread sequel that will never come, because
Right, right.
it's another movie I feel is unsung. It's
Oh yeah, one of the first
definitely.
movies we covered back on Underrated.
Oh, there you have it. You know what I mean? It's just it's this film, like you said, it's big swing,
Mhm.
big, high risk, high reward, going for the fences. We're getting big. We're getting named actors in this film. You're getting Hugo Weaving, who's in my favorite role of all time, V for Vendetta. Is one of my
Mm,
favorite faceless roles. When talk
right.
about CG and most and capture, that dude acted his. He acted like the rent was due. You never saw his face. Much like Strike here, but I definitely do believe this film does have the legs and is probably scheduled for a resurgence. Someone's going to watch this movie again and get the idea, because it's just that good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that availability is like a big thing when it comes to movies becoming these cult hits, And now that this movie is on streaming, it's so easy for people to just be like, you don't have to go out and buy the DVD or, go to the library and pick it up or whatever it might be. Most people have Hulu, like
Mhm.
or a lot of people do. It's now that Fox is owned by Disney, it's going to be on there probably indefinitely. So it's not going to be one of those ones you have to worry about disappearing from streaming services or like bouncing between different ones. So I think with this movie being available, like we said, it's been just a little bit over 5 years now, or 5 or 6 years now since it's been released. I think that this is about the time when stuff starts to really kind of take on that second life, starts getting rediscovered, starts getting, reclaimed. I think once you hit 10 years, that's really so we've got a few years left. That's when I think movies really get reclaimed by the people who love them. People start being like, "Hey, you know what we missed on? Mortal Engines. Check it out." I think even if it's a movie that you're not going to completely love and go over the moon for, it's one that it'll capture your interest, because my interest was definitely captured. I watched there was when I was doing the miniseries about all the big swings, I was like, I want to watch as many of these as possible. So I watched I found everything I could that kind of fit those criteria, and that's when I originally watched this one, and I was like, man, it is just so weird and swinging for the fences, and it does not everything necessarily works in it, but God, they were. I respect them so much for like really trying something new and unique and different. And unfortunately, that did not work out for them critically or financially, but given the test of time, maybe it's going to come around, we'll see.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's just so much it's so much story to tell,
Mm,
where it's hard to, it's almost it's you can't really ignore it. It's such a big world. Even thinking about like, and there's so much that this movie dabbles into that, like we were talking about earlier. You just want to know more. You just want to learn more
mm,
about, but what's behind the wall, because you really don't see anything behind the wall outside of the wall base. You see a couple
right.
of homes and pagodas, things like that, and the gatekeepers, so to speak.
Mhm.
But I want to learn more about the scavengers who are just running around looking for people just running through the countryside with their
Yeah.
giant scorpion hooks,
Yeah.
and their
Yeah.
get over here's, and it's just so much world. Like even the Air Haven can't,
Mm,
got to be more than one. And there's
yeah.
one line. It was a throwaway line about what they call America now. It's like New America, or it's like Mode America, because they have this
Mm.
line where they say, "Oh yeah, of course the world's gonna be different when the tectonic plates just crack."
Oh,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
what does that mean?
Right.
How is their life? And it's like
Mhm.
there's so many questions, even about like the technology of the Medusa system, which is that
Mhm.
purple, like you mentioned, that purplish, almost royal color
Mm.
technology that I would love to learn how that works. Like what kind of energy is this using? And it just tickles the brain. It tickles the imagination, and I think
Right.
that's where a lot of this film can be something more than what it ended up being, and it is a shame because it just came wrong place, wrong time, maybe wrong mindset at the time. People just weren't really open to accept it, and I love films that don't really necessarily go too far on big name actors. I like
Mhm.
the actor to be molded into the role. It's like Tom is Dwayne the Rock Johnson. I'm not going to buy that, dude. It's just the Rock. He's just
Yeah,
the Rock,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it being an unknown actor, you kind of easier to see their point of view, easier to become immersed on their story. So, yeah, this film is extremely interesting. So much potential.
Mm,
It's a shame how it was received, but that's never almost the end of anyone's story. You know what I mean? Of
yeah,
any particular story. So this may come back in a different medium. It may be
yeah.
animated. It would be beautiful. Like Howl's Moving Castle, I'm sure, with the inspiration of
Right.
this
Yeah,
story.
yeah.
And it's just, I would love to see just different cultures. And it's like it's always that thing where it's like, okay, this is what's happening on this part of the world. What's
Mhm.
happening on the other side of the world? How are they dealing with it? You know what I
Right.
mean? Like
Yeah.
Game of Thrones. What's happening over there with all this
Yeah.
magic and mystery? What's
Mhm.
happening over there? So it's just so much that this story can give, and I'm just really happy that they were able to tell the story they did with
Mhm.
all the money in the world and all the backing, and they really got to make this visual spectacle that I
Mhm.
think they were all proud of. It's just sometimes it just doesn't hit.
Yeah, and I think you brought up something really interesting, which is talking about you're curious about what else is going on in the rest of the world, and because I was also like, well, what's happening in America? Like they mentioned, like this is all set in Europe. Obviously, we know that behind the shield wall is a lot of Asia, but you don't know what's going on in America or like Australia or Africa or anything like
Mhm.
that. And it's the distant hills thing, right? It's like if you just have like if you do a painting, you paint the foreground really well, and then you have the hills, they're kind of blurry. That's what this movie is doing with all these. It's giving you details so that they might not have filled out everything that's happened in the whole world, but they give you enough details that you're kind of like curious. Your mind kind of fills in the blanks. It's these blurry distant hills that aren't filled in, but you know what they are. And it reminded me a lot of ways to Mad Max, particularly
Yeah.
Mad Max Fury Road, where that's another movie. It's set in this post-apocalyptic, wasteland where it's kind of like society's evolved and stuff like that. They hold high regard for kind of this special the old technology and stuff like that. That one's just set in Australia, so you're like, okay, cool. Like, what we know, there was some kind of war that like destroyed everything, and we're seeing this society here in Australia. We don't really know what the society is like in the rest of the world. So it does that same thing. You get a little bit more of it in Furiosa, which I really appreciated, which ironically enough was originally written going to be as an animated, like an anime film. they decided to make it a whole film. But that still focuses on Australia, so it expands the world, but still not too much. You still have those distant hills. And speaking of Mad Max, one thing that links this and Mad Max Fury Road is the score, which are incredible in both because both are done by Junkie XL, who is more of like a kind of techno electronic musician, but he did the score for Mad Max, and they brought him on board to. His real name is Tom Holkenborg, and so he's a DJ. He comes on and does the soundtrack for this, and that was one of the few things, along with the effects, that actually was really praised by critics. Was how good this score was. Did you have any like thoughts on the score? Did that impact you at all?
It's funny with scores. It's either they're so good they stand out, or they're so good that you don't even. They just immerse you. And the thing about the score with me is that it blended so well with what was going on and conveying the emotions without it being lyrics to a song, that I completely just let it melt into the story. And I was so immersed because sometimes the music can throw you off, and sometimes it's licensed music. But here, the score was so subtle, you know what I mean, to me, that when it was bombastic, it flowed well with the cranking engines and the screeching metal, that it just kind of all blended together. And I think that's a testament to how good it is as well, is that the score was strong in the point where it knew where it knew where the focus needed to be. And it just amplified that focus. So Junkie XL I have a bunch of vinyls of his, like doing other films. So huge fan of his. And I didn't realize he did the soundtrack until you just told me. That's one tidbit I didn't catch. But it makes perfect sense. He does a really good job at knowing where his sound is needed and being able to just really adapt to the mood of a scene, the mood of the story. So I give it 100% props. It did exactly what it needed to do.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Like because it was something that I wasn't really thinking about during the movie, but doing some research and stuff like afterwards, I was like, oh yeah, that was a really good score. Because like you said, it doesn't draw attention to itself. It's like the thing with editing at the Academy Awards. It's like people are always like, well, they give it to the wrong thing, because with editing, you're not supposed to notice it. You know, like good editing doesn't draw attention to itself, and in a lot of ways, good score doesn't either. It's the score is there to support the movie, and it's kind of amplifying all the things you're seeing, all the emotions you're feeling, and this really does a great job with that. I could definitely see this as, when I write, I like to put on soundtracks a lot, including the Mad Max one. Honestly, I think this one is going to get added to the rotation after having listened to this.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
I believe it.
Yeah. So all around, just the vibes of this movie were on point. I don't know. Did you have any other kind of stray thoughts on the movie that we haven't hit yet?
Absolutely. Going back to my youth and watching 90s films, that the big swings of the 90s, because I think every generation has their share of big swings.
Yeah.
In the 2000s, and just thinking of movies like Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow, and thinking of movies like that, where it's just the landscape is just so vibrant and so big, and the big swing is almost gargantuan, in it's just the scope, and sometimes the swing is bigger than the execution. And I think that's where a lot of these films fail, is that the swing, they bit off more than they can chew in certain films. Whereas in this film, it never felt heavy-handed. Nothing about the world building felt heavy-handed, because they say something a little bit, but then there's a map on the wall of the known world, and you see the United States for like a split second, and see like molded with some other country. It's like, it looks crazy, but I think that the visual storytelling, like I mentioned, is very directorial-esque, where there's a lot of color communication, a lot of practical effects being utilized in the background that don't draw attention to themselves, even down to Shrike having his Land of Misfit toy gallery, where he's tinkering with toys, trying to fix broken things, quote unquote, to even flashback scenes where Hester was with her mom and Tom and Hugo Weaving, and kind of seeing how her mom goes about. You see all the little archaeology things all around her house in the black box that contains the Medusa effect, and what that symbol means. I still kind of, it looked like an A, like almost like a jagged A for America. I didn't want to make the assumption, Like, did America create this? Like, is this a joint unified creation of this almost cold fusion esque power? You
Right.
know what I mean?
Like the little drive has like USA on it, so you're like, oh, is that like? Do
It's
other
each.
countries have them, and this was the one that was the Americas, and it somehow made its way over here?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, the drive had a USA flag on it, but it was
Mm.
found in Europe. What does
Yeah.
that mean? Like you said, does each member of the UN get
Right. That's what I was
get a
thinking. Yeah.
drive?
And they
You
never
know,
tell you that. It's just
no.
visual storytelling. It's so
Visual
good.
storytelling. It's
Yeah.
super good. And the locket with the eye
Mhm.
of I forget, it was the eye of, I forget which deity it was, but that was the one, that was the thing that held
Mhm.
the actual drive that deactivated it versus activating it.
Mhm.
Just it's very subtle storytelling. Just hidden, not even hidden in plain sight for anyone who dared to just think about it while the story was pacing along. You know what I mean?
Right. Absolutely. And one of my favorite moments of that is, and it really tells you how like London has progressed, how it is still built on the same bones of the old London, but they've done with all so much of their old tech, they've kind of reworked it the same way that Mad Max, you have all these things that were one thing in the old world and they've gotten repurposed into something to the new world. My one of my favorite moments was when they're like getting on what it looks like kind of like a subway or something, and they're talking about rush hour because he's got to get somewhere, and the transportation system is the London Eye. You know, this
Yeah.
thing that was like an entertainment thing back in the old world has been changed and reutilized for a practical effect, and you kind of see them go down. And it never says like, oh, remember when this used to be like. There's nothing like that. They just jump on the London Eye. If you're not thinking about it, you're not going to notice. You're just like, okay, here's like a gondola thing they're going on. But if you're like paying attention, you're like, wow, that's so cool. And there's so much stuff in the movie, and I'm sure I missed a ton of it
Yeah.
like that, where it's just kind of, I think you see Big Ben for a second, but it's just off in the background. And obviously the church itself gets repurposed into kind of just like this, where they house the war machine. That's where the finale happens. I really loved that whole thing. So doing a lot of really really smart stuff just on a storytelling visual level. And like you said, I think that comes from, it's interesting whenever you see a director from a different background how he will approach storytelling. Somebody like a David Fincher who started in music videos might tell a story this way. Somebody who started in, as a writer and then transitioned to director, they might be, much more story focused. And this guy, being a visual effects artist, obviously is very visual effects focused in terms of his storytelling. So yeah, I think that all of that, all of that came together in a really spectacular way.
100%. And having the backing of Peter Jackson and Academy Award winning Weta doesn't hurt either. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
no, exactly.
Having the full strength and weight of that
Mm,
name and that pedigree really helped weigh down. It's real easy for things to look light in CGI when it's primarily CGI,
yeah,
but CGI in this film felt like it was weighted. You know what I mean? And when they
yeah.
were crushing the smaller town at the beginning of the film, and you could see it just go through that trash compactor to quote unquote feed the beast,
Hmm.
and everyone's down there, like old school industrial revolution London, just covered in soot and trying to piece
Hmm.
out the little bits of technology that may have been salvaged from this town. It's just very weighted and rusty and steam, going back to steampunkish. It's just a very interesting take on old and new.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that's a good point, because CGI has a tendency like to feel kind of lightless, feel like physics don't really matter, feel very bouncy, is a
Yeah.
term I hear get thrown around a lot. But this didn't feel like that at all. It felt like when something would get hit by like something, like they would go into a ditch or something, or like a city would roll over, like it was all very slow and methodical, and it looked, even though it was not practical, they do mix some practical stuff in. What is always good with that too, but it felt real. It felt practical. It felt like everything had some real weight. It wasn't bouncy. The only time I think that anything felt like very like planes flying and stuff like that, they'd crash and boom, they wouldn't just like bounce off the ground. They would really smash, things would get rolled over like treads. The only time though I think that it did feel a little weightless was when the Shrike would be throwing people around, which works because the Shrike is a beast. He's a fucking
Yeah.
monster. He'll just chuck you out of a plane like you're a paper rag doll, And so that all really worked. Like it's just this movie, man, it's something else.
Yeah, I love and I love the local motion of
Mm,
the actual of the hunter cities and the smaller
mm,
cities. And the scene I keep thinking about is when Tom and Hester are being chased by the two scavenger trucks, the two
yeah,
scavenger, and just the local motion, like the rhythm going
yeah,
back to like Miyazaki almost feels like this
mm,
that kind of local motion and them shooting their spears and seeing the spear almost hit the soil and sag in the soil for a split second before they pull it out. You know what I mean? Just giving it
yeah,
weight. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And just really giving life to these things that, in all intents and purposes, would look fake if you didn't really put the time and effort into making them feel as tangible as possible in this world, where it's almost like the Serengeti, where the
mm,
lion is chasing the gazelle. You know what I mean? I got a lot
yeah,
of that came to mind. Like, man, this reminds me of like watching National Geographic,
mm,
seeing
mm,
London chase down this smaller town and just let it wear itself down. You know what I
right,
mean? And then
right.
dragging into the mall of the city, which is a very
Mhm.
visually stunning moment.
Right. And, talking about like these big things, they move so slow. I think that was one of the problems that people had with the recent Godzilla X Kong movie, the American one, which I thought was fine, but that was a valid complaint. It's like these big, huge monsters and they're just like running around. They're not these lumbering, slow creatures like they are in a lot of the older movies, a lot of like Godzilla Minus One or something like that. Whereas here, it's like, yeah, London is like this huge lumbering thing, and then it will kind of cut to like the smaller town, and it's just like you see this colossal thing slowly gain on him. And I think that it did a really good job with scale in this movie. Once again with Godzilla, scale is sometimes a problem. It's like, how tall is he, like, compared to this thing, when somebody's looking at him. Not to pick on Godzilla, but it's a problem that a lot of movies that are dealing with scales that go back and forth between this really run into. And like London is like fucking huge, and you don't really get that until like you'll see it from like the ground level. You'll see the people that it's chasing. You'll see people leave behind. Kind of like look up at it. You'll see the trees, like they're just these small little things getting run over. And then I think where you feel that most is when you see the people in the tracks. Like there's these
Mhm.
deep, like 20-foot deep tracks made by just the wheels of this thing, and it's just rolling along like it's nothing. And one of the moments that does that very early on in that opening sequence we talked about is you see the Bavarian city kind of crest this hill and go over it, and then the one just plows right through it.
Mhm.
So the scale of this movie and how consistent and like clear that was, because scale is a thing that is very difficult to communicate
Yes.
with your audience, and I thought they did a great job with it.
I really appreciate you mentioning scale and how it can really make or break your film if your scale is off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just put it together that those giant trenches they were running through were the tracks of the city. That just blew my mind a little bit. I didn't put that together. In seeing London from the ground up, it's like that moment in Rogue One where you see a
Mm,
Star Destroyer over a city. Because it's out
yeah.
in space, because it's all kind of to scale, you don't really think about it until it's over something practical. Not practical, but
Mhm.
something that it could be compared to. Use the doves for scale. You know what I mean? You want to give something
Yeah.
scale, use doves. So seeing these ships and seeing even the planes in practicality and seeing them in scale gives the movie a whole lot of weight to it, showing human beings next to this thing. And it's not just a set that they're walking on. This is a huge, actual London-sized machine that's wreaking havoc across Europe. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
I think scale is extremely important, and I think every film director who has to deal with it has to do it in a very tasteful, almost delicate way. Because
Yeah.
one scene can question the scale of the entire film.
Yeah, absolutely. Because honestly, humans have like a tough time with scale. Like it's
Mhm.
something that, like, we have difficulty comprehending like the size of like the sun or Jupiter or something like it's something that intellectually it's difficult to understand. And when a film is able to visually show that and, like we said, be consistent about it, it's a really quite a marvel.
Absolutely, it's the jaw dropping moment, right? Seeing
Mhm.
Godzilla in scale, seeing
Yeah.
What I mean, Iron Giant in
Yeah.
cartoon scale. seeing something you've never seen before, and being able to just now I can wrap my brain around what's happening a bit better, and that just helps boost immersion and puts you into that moment, into that scene. Absolutely.
Yeah. I love whenever I do one of these podcasts and I go in liking a movie a lot, and then the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, no, this is actually really great. And I come out the other side
man.
like, yeah,
That's what it's all about.
I love it. I got one more question for you though, because we talked about the old things that we see, and the old tech, and there's that museum, which is really cool. One of the things we see in the museum are referred to as the American deities. So my question for you is this the best movie with minions in it?
Yes. The answer is yes. Minions are the history of minions is such a rabbit hole. You know what I mean? Just the idea of minions and them being shown as 2,000-year-old deities, and like
right.
That's just how it would go. You know what I mean? Someone may see like an old picture of MC Hammer and think he was some kind of wrathful god. You just don't know in the turbo future. So to answer your question, yes, because I personally, those Minion movies are not built for me. So them being seen as like deities, almost like Ewoks in the future. Sure, why not? Let's go for it.
That was such a good moment too. You're just like, there's fucking minions in this, and it's before even the title credits. So it just is like, it kind of puts you in the mindset of like, this is a future that is so far removed from us that they don't know what the minions are. They think they're these like, it's like you see the Venus idol or whatever, and it's like, okay, people assume that they pray to that, but I don't know who knows what that thing actually was. We have no context for it, so I thought that was really funny.
Hercules was just Dave down the street. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was great. I will say, I hate the Minions, like actual Minions movies. They're not good. I don't mind the Despicable Me. At least the first two. I've only seen the first two movies as much. I think 2 is particularly good. But yeah, this is definitely better than any of those movies, I'll say.
Yeah, 1,000%. Yeah, it's just them existing in the periphery of this film just gives them more credence than anything outside of the Despicable Me 1.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite Letterboxd reviews that I saw for it was I think it was something like, let me scroll down, see if I can find it. Okay, here it is. No one's gonna believe me, but there were actual fucking minions in this movie, which is I think it's so just like, all right, cool.
You talked about Easter eggs, right? It's just like done tastefully. Easter eggs could be amazing. What I mean? And just they're not knocking you over the head with it. Just something, if you catch it, you're good to go. And it's just, I love it. I love when filmmakers can squeeze those in and not be too pretentious about it. It makes the film better.
Yeah. It's a funny, lighthearted moment, which this movie definitely has its fair share of, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a blast. I'm so glad I finally got to talk about this movie. I'm glad you and I see eye to eye on it, because I have a lot of respect and admiration for it. But yeah, where can people hear more of you? Where can people get your stuff?
Absolutely. So with that, definitely thank you for having me on the show. This has been an amazing opportunity. Would love to do more. If you ever want Mike G back, just let me know. If you'd like to hear more Mike G, you can check us out on our website, mastersofthenerdiversecast.com. All of our episodes are up there, YouTube videos, the whole shebang. So you can check us out there, or you can check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere where you listen to your podcast audibly or visually. Visually, that's a word in the near future. Yeah. You'll find MOTN there. So I'm looking forward to making more content and just being a part of the podcast community. This is amazing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. And if anybody out there, thank you guys for listening. If you can follow us on all the social media places, if you'd like to, give us 5 stars on however you're listening here. It really helps the show quite a bit. Or go to underratedmoviepodcast.com. We have a Patreon now, patreon.com/underratedmoviepodcast, where there's a bonus podcast once a month. And so you can check that out. There's one we were recently doing on sports movies. We're going to be doing it on 2D versions of 3D movies coming up here. We're going to start a new season of that. And then you also get episodes a week early and ad-free if you sign up for even just $1 on the Patreon. I wanted to shout out a couple recent patrons. Thank you to David Holloway and Josh Murray, who recently signed up on the Patreon. Glad to have you guys there. And I would love anybody who's listening to also sign up. I also just want to mention to check out on Mondays when this doesn't come out, I do another podcast called The Midnight Film Society, where I talk about upcoming movies or movies that have just released with my buddy Damien, kind of give reviews on that. And then the last podcast that I do, Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones, about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Whenever there's a new MCU release, I do an episode of that. Sometimes I'll do bonus episodes for the Patreon for that as well, for MCU adjacent stuff. So keep an eye out for Kraven the Hunter coming soon for that. But yeah, definitely check that stuff all out. And one more time, Mike, thank you for coming on, and I'll see everybody next time.
You got it. Thank you so much. Would you, Shrike's chasing you, he's all like, would you like to extend your vehicle warranty? No, man.
Esther, extend your warranty.
Esther. This is Sally Mae.